So wasn't that great? That was phenomenal, right? It was exciting. I remember being a kid and excited about space travel. This has me excited again. And I want to go see Apollo 11 again, and one more orbit. 25,000 miles in 46 hours, 39 minutes, 38 seconds, something like that, yeah? That's quite a distance, so very exciting stuff. And I actually had the chance to go to Huntsville recently. Sorry, just had in my new role, and I got to see Wernher von Braun's where he tested the Saturn V rockets, and it was very exciting. So this is very cool to be up here. So anyhow, thank you very much, David and Todd and Colonel Wirtz. So next, we're moving on. So what does it take to restore archival film footage from 1969? So we heard a little bit about that. So we're going to get into the challenges, the workflows, the successes in remastering Apollo 11 for the big screen. This segment is called Apollo 11 Restoring a Masterpiece. And so I'd like to invite Will Cox, CEO of Final Frame, and Meetal Gokul, Senior Director of Global Client Services at IMAX, to join Todd here on stage. Give him a round of applause. Yes?
Todd Miller. Nice to see you again. Yep.
This mic on. Can we start with the, we're going to start with the Apollo 11 theatrical trailer, the 2-minute theatrical trailer here.
I'd like to know what you feel as far as the responsibilities of representing mankind on this trip.
That's relatively difficult to answer. It's a job that we collectively said that was possible and we could do, and of course the nation itself is backing us, so we just sincerely hope that we measure up to that.
The whole Apollo program was designed to get 2 Americans to the lunar surface and back again to Earth safely. The enormity of this event is something that only history will be able to judge.
Apollo 11 has very simply been given the mission of carrying men to the moon, landing them there, and bringing them safely back.
You can feel it in here when it's on.
Okay, I'll flight controllers, go to
Go, I don't know.
Go. GNC, go. Econ, go. Surgeon, go. Captain onward, go for landing.
Here, go for landing, over. Roger, there, go for landing. 30 feet, 2.5 now.
30 seconds.
More forward, just to the right, go. 20 feet, 2.5. Forward, just to the right. Contact light.
Wow. Amazing, guys. Okay, can we go to the PowerPoint slide? Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next part of this exciting day, Imaging Among the Stars. So yeah, we're going to talk about what it takes to restore this amazing footage from 1969. Over the next 40 minutes, we'll discuss the challenges, workflows, and successes in remastering the film for the big screen. So we have 2 wonderful guests. You've already met Todd, the director and producer of Apollo 11, and we've got Will Cox here, CEO and founder and supervising colorist as well at Final Frame Post in New York and London. So I'm going to let Will talk a little bit about Final Frame to start with, and then we'll go into the nitty-gritty.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to SMPTE for inviting me. That was very generous of you guys. So about 4 years ago, I said, hey, we're going to buy a film scanner. And everybody went, you're going to do what? This is not an industry that needs more film scanners. But what we were finding with unscripted programming, of which we do an awful lot, that the quality of what was in film was not being properly represented in the delivery. And as 4K cameras were coming out, the archival was looking worse and worse and worse. So we sort of decided that we had to bring better scanning to the archive market for theatrical films. And just happened that when we did that, Todd and I had worked on a couple movies together, but Todd said, hey, you know, we're going to do this movie. I want to go back. Most of the scans on the Apollo 11 footage had been done in the late 90s, the early aughts, a few a bit later than that, but we sort of decided that the image quality wasn't what it needed to be, and so Todd said, we've got to do this all again. So that was sort of, so we were actually a late comer to film, but, and maybe it was that we weren't smart enough to realize that we shouldn't do it, so we went ahead and we did it.
Cool. Okay, so that's just a little bit about that. So yeah, let's have a look at what it actually takes to go through the historical negatives, scanning, the processing, restoration software that's required, you know, from edit through to final color. So I know Todd had a dream, and I'm going to let you guys discuss that.
Well, we're getting back in the time machine, so we're probably saying things that we haven't even talked about publicly.
I know, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, this is be interesting. So when we did that, I mentioned the short film, the Apollo 17 short that we did. We had to use a preferred vendor that NASA and National Archives use, and I wasn't really happy with the results of that. A lot of times, you know, you're asked to do that, and it's, you know, the same house and it's the same scanner, and it just gets, you know, they don't upkeep it, and it just becomes a machine. When Will was getting into the scanning business, I knew that there was going to be some caretaking, because we kind of build films the same way, you know, really by hand. We get, you know, we like to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty, but I don't think any of us, neither one of us, we didn't know how dirty we didn't know exactly how big a project it was. I think I initially thought we had some idea that it was probably going to be about 100 reels, maybe, something like that. And then when this research project that I talked about in the previous session uncovered that there was this large format, Will's answer to that, by the way, was, that's okay, we can do that. So we now had, at the time, we had some 8mm, we had 16, we had 35, we had 65 5-perf, the proto IMAX large format that anybody that remembers any of those great large format films, mainly a lot of stuff shot in Cinerama, 3 cameras, 3 projection screens from the mid-50s, late 50s, and into the 60s. That's what this was shot on, Todd AO footage. And then we also had this crazy 70-10 perf, all the engineering film, mainly from Marshall Flight Center, that was all the really great engineering shots, slow motion, 600, 800 frames per second of the rocket taking off. So instead of 100, it was closely like, I think every month that went by, we were like, all right, we have 200, now we have 300, now we have 400. And then once word really got out what we were doing, then it really took on a life of its own. Probably the most, and at the time, the scanner that Will and the team had developed, this prototype, was capable of doing 4K. And we were up at Final Frame in Will's facility, and a couple government guys are there. And Will, in the middle of this, you know, this conference room about basically how we're going to do this. Are we going to go down to the National Archives, set up shop for a year, and scan all this stuff, which was the plan, or are we going to transport all this stuff, which had never left, you know, the Beltway in DC, and get it into a high security place like Manhattan? What are we going to do? So in the midst of all that, just if we didn't have that to think about, Will turns to me and he goes, you know, Todd, and Sandy, his tech guru, goes, I don't know if you should tell him. He's like, nah, I'll tell him. He's like, if we wait 6 months, we can scan everything in 16K. And the director and me, like, all eyes just kind of, I remember all these heads just like turning, and Will's got this like devilish grin, like he has right now.
Dumbest moment of my entire life.
But that, I think like the director and me was like, yes, you know, the editor and me just lost 6 months of edit.
Right. Well, what became very clear was that the scanning process, dealing with this footage, was moving from just making Todd's film to addressing footage that the world didn't really know was out there, hadn't been seen, and was going to be available, as you say, to the historical record. So the scanning operation moved away from just trying to get Todd's movie made to, hey, we're dealing with an awful lot of footage, and we need to scan it at high enough quality that, not future-proofed, but certainly was going to be good enough that NARA wouldn't want to go back to the film itself.
And you were actually, kind of the pitch was, you had, we'd done so much, you could speak to the tech, looking at the pixels, projecting it, knowing if there was more information to be gained, and just not the 65, a lot of the 16 and the 35. They'd actually done a really good job on the majority of all the available 16 millimeter back in 2008-ish. And it was pretty good, but they, back then, I think they did it for a Discovery or History Channel project, and it had been transferred all to HD, and that was unfortunate. So even though I think they originally had scanned in 2K, but and it was all telecine. And so we knew that, and there was some documentation, the companies that did it weren't around anymore, but there was some problems with some of that footage. So we definitely thought in testing that we could do not only a better job, but we can add to it too, and future-proof it, as much as we could.
Yeah, that's excellent. So we've gone from, we've got 16 mil, we've got 35 mil, and now we found the 70 mil negatives. Do we want to just discuss a little bit about showing the differences in resolution of those different prints? Should we just go through a little bit about showing the differences between 16 all the way up through to 70?
Sure. So do you want to talk about, you were the one who originally built this little montage.
Yeah, so this, there was for the space nerds out there like me, there's a cult classic called Moonwalk 1, and the majority of the really great footage, for those of you who've seen the film, all the ground-based photography in and around the launch in particular and the recovery operations was captured for that film. It was a co-production that was done with NASA. And the director, Thea Kamika, they started shooting on this 65 5-perf Tadeo formatted camera, mainly with Mitchell cameras. And it was just stunningly gorgeous. Really great DPs were working on it. But they found, as most people know when you work with large format, it was very difficult to work with.
Yes.
And expensive. So they switched, and they ended up just releasing Moonwalk 1 in 35. So what you're seeing here is actually a print from, I believe it was an internegative that was done from, or it might have been a print, I can't remember off the top of my head, but from Moonwalk 1. And this originally was a 65 5-perf, and you'll see it as we run through. We had access to the original negative. So what you're seeing in the smaller box is what has generally the public has seen. In this next one, our archive producer worked with a team that did a restoration back in 2008 of Moonwalk 1, and they actually got a print from the director himself, Theo Kamika. It was sitting underneath his desk in upstate New York. He's unfortunately no longer with us, but he gave that print, and we thought that was the last surviving thing from Moonwalk 1.
Yeah.
Little did he know, or no one that was working on that, or archive producer or anyone else, that the actual original negatives were sitting in a vault at National Archives in College Park.
Yeah, so you can see as we go all the way through, you can see it gets clearer and clearer, and there's more and more resolution.
And this also goes to the conform and color that Will does. If I work 24 hours a day on an edit, Will is just so passionate about color and conform, and this is, how many arguments do we have over grain structure and sharpening? And this is a
Quite
perfect
a few.
example of it. You shoot with these cameras, there's a lot of, the depth of field's very shallow, and so Will, I think we really said, let's just try to restore it. We don't want to introduce anything unless it's really egregious. In fact, we watched the film now and we kind of laughed because we left some hairs on it on purpose just to give it a vintage look, and I think now we both want them taken out.
Yeah.
So Will, let's talk about the technical challenges in scanning footage at 16K. Surely that's going to be painstakingly slow.
Yeah, so when we knew we were going to have to go to a larger format, first off, we had to modify our existing scanner. So we had been using these GoldenEye 4 scanners made by Digital Vision. We ostensibly pulled the guts out of them. They're a line array scanner, continuous motion line array scanner. And we built a new 16K sensor for it, built a bunch of new software to manage it. And we rapidly realized the 16K wasn't really going to be feasible. Even if the scanner could deliver it, at the time we were getting about 1 frame a second. Now, 8K scanning had been available for these formats, but the speeds that existed weren't. It took us 3.5, 4 months just to scan sort of the main body of the footage ultimately we scanned at 3.5 frames a second. If we had been scanning at 10 seconds per frame, it would have taken us, 30, 40 times longer. The movie never was going to be made. But just copy time on 16K, you're talking about 25 to 28. If you're talking about the 70 millimeter 10 perf, it was more like 32 gigs a second. So the cost and storage, as it was, we were at we loaded up the scans at about a petabyte to make the film. So while we wanted to do it at 16K, we couldn't make the deadlines. We were sort of pushing to get, I'll tell you that one in just a second. We were pushing to get the movie done. The goal was to get to Sundance, and we backed off the 16K. We are, just throwing it out, we just got our first, we're actually scanning IMAX at 23K now. In the last 2 or 3 days, we just got our first scans off the scanner at 23K. So we're continuing to develop.
But there was some kind of diminishing returns too, to go up to 16K with the 65.5.
Yeah, with the 65.5, there was a debate about how much more there was really going to be past the 8K. Obviously, downsampling and reducing the noise floor on everything would be great, and so scanning at 16K would be fantastic to make an 8K deliverable. But yeah, it was totally that curve of it. The data rate was just going sky high for very small improvement. Yeah, so the oops, I just destroyed Todd's career and bankrupted my own company. So in the R&D of this whole thing, so with the line array scanner, the new line array that we put in was ever so slightly larger than the existing one. And the gates, we were in New York with our engineers, and the gate needed to be machined open a little bit wider than it had been. And we went and found a motorcycle repair shop in Queens who was like, yeah, and he had hands like mallets, and he's like, yeah, I think I can take an angstrom off of this thing. And the rule, so we were under very limited access to the footage. The deal with NARA was that we could only scan it once. We couldn't clean it. We weren't supposed to do like a daily scan and a rescan. Todd's being very generous. We were pretty far behind schedule in getting it all done. So we were rushing to kind of get scans because I mean, it's sort of a unique thing where editorial doesn't even know what's in the footage, and they're trying to make this movie, and nobody knows what's in the reels. So we're trying to get this stuff over, and NARA also, they would send us 50 rolls at a time, and we got 5 days to scan all 50 rolls and ship it back.
We should talk about that too, because initially the reason why we did it at Will's facility was because we can work, much like Mission Control, around the clock in shifts. So Will had teams, and we had we were on visitor hours down there. When the supervisory archivist at National Archives came up, it was to check the facility, make sure it was okay, and with the idea that, and ultimately what happened was it was shipped in climate-controlled vehicles, 2 drivers, never stopped from DC to Manhattan. But the deal always was, if we had 50 reels on that shipment, they would pick up whatever we were working with, ship it back, and it had to make it back before the dock closed at 4 p.m. So, you know, anybody that's done that drive before, it's about a 4-hour drive. We had an RFID on the truck so we could see it all the time. So we're all just like this, you know, for like a year. And if you put yourself in last year, there was 2 government shutdowns. So this is, NARA's part of the Department of Justice. So at any given time, we had our attorneys talk with their attorneys, you know, keep the doors open, have the security guards there. And in fact, when the government shutdown did occur in January, it's kind of sad. Everybody that helped us, this great team, government workers there at NASA National Archives, couldn't make it out to Sundance when we premiered it this year. But anyways, so you get just the logistics of it all, just not only scanning it, but dealing with all the storage of it too.
Yeah, but let me finish
Oh,
my,
you gotta
oops,
stay
I
on.
almost destroyed your whole career.
Okay.
So when we machined open the gate ever so slightly, we didn't think to reduce the air pressure in the scanner, and we had already shipped back the first roll, and Todd turned to me and he said, "What's wrong with these scans?" And we had looked at them, but we were rushing and everything, and all the vertical lines on the rockets and everything were becoming a helical pattern because the scanner had been vibrating, and because it was a continuous motion scanner, all the vertical lines had these little swirls in them, and I really was like, what the hell are we going to do? And NARA, to their credit, sent us back the 50 rolls of film, and we got to do those again. But yeah, that was the fun, like, oops, this really, and to be frank, like, even as I'm looking at this now, this really shouldn't have worked. This, like in much the same way many aggressive efforts go, this should have failed 5 different ways, but.
Yeah, and I think it's more, you know, Will's put together, he's just built a really great team at Final Frame. So it's kind of like the way that we work. We're a small group, you know, at Statement Pictures. You know, we work on a project once every, 5 years. You're banging, a bunch out, but you got a bigger team. But that's what it feels like. Like Sandy, is in charge of the CTO over there. He could. You give him a toothpick and a rubber band, he could build a spaceship to the moon. So, and same thing with Will. He's just like putting in the hours and making it happen.
That's amazing. So yeah, let's look at some of the monumental challenges, in terms of data and software. Will, talk us through what Final Frame had to embark on to make sure Todd's film was ready on time.
So the biggest issue and the thing that made the project complicated was that we were pushing for this deadline, but we were, we had to deal with scanning, restoration, color correction, mastering, finishing, all while editorial was still going on. So Todd would send us cuts and he'd say, okay, I think, we're getting pretty close on this. So we would have to go in and start restoring the footage. And restoring footage at, like the 70 millimeter broke everything, because 8,000 by 8,000, none of the historical tools that we had really behaved properly in that. So we kind of had to do scanning, restoration, color correction, all kind of at the same time, and Todd would send us cuts, we'd conform, and then we'd be struggling to get the restoration done because the render times and the amount of data that was being generated and destroyed. We sort of did the math that we probably built and destroyed about 8 petabytes of data through the whole process of just rendering and re-rendering, and the amount of, we were running at, so everything was done on 16 gig fiber, and we were working off of one set of data because the amount of copy time was rough. We did have to go for a kind of safety first pipeline. So we worked in a display referred P3 color space. As much as we kind of knew that there was going to be a future to the project, but we had to get done for Sundance. So we did everything at 8K. All the restoration was done at 8K, but all the mastering was done at 4K. All the color correction was done at 4K, just so that we knew we could get out the door.
And even I would get proxy files. Will's facilities in Midtown Manhattan. My office is in Brooklyn, so I would literally, the minute that they would come off the scanner, I would get these 4K proxy files and be able to edit with those, offline that, or bounce it back to you guys for the conform. And that was like a daily thing, just shuttling And ultimately, we ended up, at least on my end, it ended up being 2 petabytes of material.
Some serious storage and cooling needed.
Yes. We did
in
also,
terms of
you
some of the
remember the AC failed.
Oh yeah, the AC failed.
The AC in our server room failed as well.
I walk in. This is classic Will Cox, by the way. Like, I walk in the building and it's hotter than hell in there, and they're up, on the 3rd floor of a building in Midtown, and there's these giant, like duct tape and
Silver
cardboard
ducts.
and silver things like scaling. It looks like, from like alien spaceship, like the James Cameron version, and it's going into like the server room.
Yeah, basically we had to run to Best Buy
what
and
the hell
buy
is this?
5 1-ton air conditioning units.
keep it
And
cool.
then,
Will goes,
duct
oh,
them
it's
out the
fine,
window.
it's fine,
We're
it just
good, we're
happens.
fine.
Don't worry about it. All right, let's get in the room.
Let's
And
keep
it's
going.
1,000
Don't look
degrees
there,
in the,
don't look
in the
there,
color
we're
room.
okay over
like,
here. Yeah.
So funny.
So that was
Air
harrowing.
conditioning, got to keep it going.
Yeah.
What are the grading tools and effects tools that you use to get the project going?
So again, because we had to go for sort of flexibility, the bulk of the work was done in a digital vision Dakota because it has restoration tools along with color correction. So the lion's share of the work was done in that. We used Nuke, After Effects, Mocha, Photoshop, Transcoder, Resolve, MTE, Flame, probably a few other things. We kind of threw everything that we had at it. The issue was that a lot of things couldn't tolerate file sizes that big. Either their allocation wasn't enough in VRAM, and when you try and load up 2 gigabyte files and you want to look across, for restoration, you're loading up 8, sometimes 10 frames into VRAM. At 2 gigs a frame, a lot of these things just couldn't tolerate it and would crash and just wouldn't really behave. But yeah, so those are the bulk of the tools. But DV, the Dakota platform for restoration was pretty important because we were changing the cut was coming to us, and we needed to be in a really flexible sort of pipeline, and we couldn't use too many tools because it was all kind of happening in one place at one time.
And I don't know if we want to talk about it now, but when we premiered the film at Sundance, that's the last week of January every year, and then Neon, who was our theatrical distributor, who we picked up out of Cannes the year before, but just showing them 20 minutes. So they were they were the ones pushing us. They said, we got to get into Sundance, So we get it ready, get it into Sundance, and then they walked it in the door to IMAX, and then you had to deliver IMAX as well. So that was a whole other thing, and we only had, that was the first week of March. So we had less than a couple weeks to get to go back to whatever source files and
and deliver at 8K because we ultimately did have to deliver at 8K for the film out. So we sent 8K DPX files of the finished grade and restoration in order to do the film out because that was the goal.
And by the way, we did for Universal, who was part of the international component of the release, wanted an HDR, so you had to go back to the original source next.
You're killing my last slide,
okay.
man. You're killing my last slide.
I'm seeing the clock ticking. I didn't know.
Save the best for last.
All right.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, Todd. Apart from the obvious restoration work, what unique restoration challenges did you throw at Will and his team? Was there anything specific that you really wanted out of this?
I think it was just to just restore it, to get it as true as what it was. I mean, the footage was. First of all, I can't tell you the effort that went into it. It's just an unbelievable achievement on behalf of Will and his team. When you're dealing with new technology, as most of you know, it's scary, it's terrifying. And I know Will put on a good face, but he has a poor poker face. So I knew it was going to be difficult. There wasn't anything that was. I'll put it to you this way. I was very confident in anything that we threw at them, they would step up or find a way to make it work. Yeah. There was so much of thinking on your feet, thinking outside the box, how could we handle all this? And I know we talk about the footage, but the audio as well. It was the same thing, and I feel like just we all just felt such an immense responsibility because of the material and just the breadth of it, and that we just wanted to do as best a job we can. So this was the perfect place to take it because I knew they would put in the sweat equity to make it work.
Yeah, no, it's important. I mean, definitely, respecting the material is super important. So the next DCP we're going to play is actually some befores and afters of raw scans graded and then graded with restoration. So you really get a sense of how much work Will and his team, along with Todd's input, created this footage.
But before we play it, let me just say, so the flickering was probably the biggest challenge because what had happened over the years is some moisture had gotten into a lot of the cans, and so the emulsion was sort of this very organic. It wasn't like an EFI flicker. It was just non-uniformity in the scans, and very few tools. We had to write some of our own code to try and address some of that. That was the biggest challenge. Dust was tricky because if you think about when the rocket is taking off and all the ice is falling, it's very difficult to distinguish between ice and dust. Obviously, you can leave some of the dust in there because it just looks like ice. But a lot of the automated tools didn't work, so we had sent a decent amount of the stuff. We do a lot of restoration in our London office, so we were sending files over to London and having them manually paint them out. Stabilization was the film had dried over the years, so there was inconsistency in the framing, so we had to deal with that. And then exposure, because NARA had limited us to one, we got to put the scan, barring the first 50 rolls, we basically got to put the film up once. So we were guessing what the exposure was going to be. We were quite pleased with what the sensor gave us, but we did go in and cheat a little bit when we knew that there was stuff that was really bright or really dark. We would go in and scan a second time and get just the darks or just the light, and then we'd have to composite the images together to get the light from one scan and the dark from another scan. So what we're going to see is just some of the footage in various states of kind of what we were contending with. A lot of it did come in pretty good shape, but a lot of it was pretty laborious to try and get fixed.
Okay, let's roll it.
craters as dust, and all the automated tools would, all of a sudden the craters would disappear and reappear and all this kind of jazz. So a lot of this had to be manually despotted.
You guys can probably kill the music.
Yeah. I think this is actually the last one.
This we spent a lot of time on.
Yeah, because there were also, there was a decent amount of footage as well that had speed changes in it. Either they had slowed down the shooting to get better exposures, and we had to then interpolate new frames. And that with dust and grain and all this stuff.
So Meetal, now I jogged my memory. So there was a lot that I did in the edit with either time remapping or like speed changes that I would throw the wheel, and that just caused a whole host of problems. But a lot of it was to try to get it back to either a 24 or a 23.976 time base. And then they would have to do all the interpolation and speed changes on their end on the conform. But the one shot of the Saturn V, when it goes through before staging, right after launch, when it's going through all the atmospherics, that was done by Lauren, for the most part, by hand in the London office. And I'm glad that she doesn't suffer PTSD, because I knew that took like weeks to do, she was saying.
Yeah, some of those shots took an awful lot of time. We had a number of really good people, Simon Marbrook and Lauren, who have a lot of history despotting, and you just go in and you just manually got to go in and get it out because there are no real tools. So, I mean, we can sort of blast through this. I mean, color correction, the only meaningful conversations that we had was that the footage needed to be period appropriate. At first, I was removing even too much of the grain, our grain tools, so Todd was like, no, let a little bit of the grain back in there. Honestly, the 65 had stood up so well, and the colors were so beautiful and so saturated that there was a lot of rein it in. It was really easy to just keep going and just to make it more and more sort of spectacular, but it stopped feeling appropriate. I mean, this was where you and I, you would come in and just go, it's too much, and I'd just pull it back a little bit and pull it back a little bit.
Even more with the 16 too, I feel like, when you get into kind of doing, smoothing and that sort of thing, and noise reduction, you lose the,
the impact.
Yeah,
definitely having.
So we argued a lot about that.
Yeah.
No,
we didn't argue. It was all.
You told me what to do, and I did it.
Yeah. I would leave, and then he'd stay there till 2 a.m. and do whatever he wanted.
2 a.m. I mean, barring that, so what you guys might not know, and this is to Todd's genius, no assistant editors, no APs, no support. Todd edited the film entirely by himself. His producing partner, Tom, produced the whole thing by himself without any support. There were a lot of people supporting you in the kind of history and making everything accurate, but the actual nuts and bolts of making the film, the entire sound mix was done by one guy. The entire score, if you guys don't know, all of the music in the film was made on equipment that existed in 1969. Wow. So, which is kind of amazing.
Including a Moog synthesizer from 1968.
Todd edited the film, and we really only had about 5 people really working on the film inside Final Frame. So it was a lot of just us putting our heads down and grinding it out and working a lot of late nights.
No, that's amazing. So I know Todd briefly touched on this, but we've done the film version and we've got all these beautiful prints made, but then someone talks about HDR, and there was an HDR opportunity here.
I thought it was simple. I mean, what's the big deal? HDR. They said, I think we had a month.
Yeah, we had about a month.
And Will goes, I can't, you got to give me 2, man. I go, you got a month or they're just not going to do it. So all the flickering, everything with that flickering, as soon as you introduce that added contrast, it totally, all the flickering just came right back. And very few restoration tools work properly in ACES, so we had a lot of work to do to work. They all expect a certain amount of contrast,
And so we had to kind of go back in. All of the dust busting obviously worked. That was the benefit of working in 8K the whole time. Was all of that was okay. But the flickering, the exposure, and because we had worked in this display referred space, when we went to a scene referred space, we were going back. Almost all the restoration, barring dust busting, had to be done entirely again. But we knew the footage better. We knew kind of what the threshold was for how good it had to get. But yeah, working in ACES for a restoration project like this, maybe a third of the tools that we had been using were tools that worked. Otherwise, they just were of no help. But the HDR, has anybody seen it in HDR?
No.
It's mind-blowing.
I mean, early on, Will said, we got to do this in HDR. We got to do this. This was like, before we even finished the film. And then that's like, careful what you wish for. You're not going to see your family for, a month.
Yes.
That's really exciting. Okay, Will, what are you guys working on at the moment? Anything exciting?
Well, as I said, we're doing some very large format. So we've sort of weirdly become a go-to spot for large format shooting. So a lot of projects that are working with 65, we're talking to. So we're doing that. I don't know. We got a million things going on. Sundance. Yeah, Sundance is already looking to be a very. I think we have 9 movies that we have to do from Sundance this year, so we've got a lot.
Small number there.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, I think we're down to like the last 3.5 minutes, so we'll see if we've got any last questions for Todd or any questions for Will.
Rod Evenson, you mentioned the 10 perf format. Was that 65 millimeter, or was that the mil spec, which I think is 70 millimeter?
It was 70.
Yeah, it was 70.
So it was essentially the mil, not 65 perforations on 70 millimeter. Okay.
Right, correct. Yep.
Merrill Weiss Group. Since you've now preserved what is a worldwide cultural asset, how do you plan to preserve it digitally?
Well, so we have to deliver all this footage back to NARA for public domain. We are now talking about delivering it to them at 8K. Originally they were asking 4K, but we met with Dan Rooney. So NARA wants all the files back in their unrestored state. So the raw scans we're sending down to NARA as 10-bit DPX files that are native resolution to what we film. So either 8,000 by 5,000, ballpark 8,000 by 8,000, or 4K. And they're all going to exist at NARA in their digital archive.
So NARA is taking responsibility for the preservation?
Correct.
Yep.
Right, yeah. And we did a film out from 8K files to an IMAX negative that, as David and Patricia will tell you, is less expensive and better than any digital archive out there.
Absolutely.
Go film.
And will be good for 100 years. So there's that as well.
Fantastic.
500 years, Will. 500.
Are there any last questions or anything like that from anyone?
All right.
No? Well then, from Todd, Will, and I, thank you for listening to this amazing story.
Thank you, Meetal. Thanks, sir.
Now hold on just a moment. We have another clip we want to play before you head off to break. Earlier we had Colonel Terry Virts up here, and he has this clip from One More Orbit, which is the record-breaking trip around the Earth that I mentioned in 25,000 miles in 46 hours, 39 minutes, and 38 seconds. And so he didn't get to see that, so we're going to play that in just a moment. And after that, you can head out to coffee, but please be back here at 11 for Project Artemis. We're going to have Rodney Groves from NASA do that. And just one final thank you so much to Meetal, Todd, and Will. What you did and what you accomplished with that film from 50 years ago is truly astounding. So thank you so much. And please stay tuned to watch one more. Are we ready?
We have a Starfighter F-104 supersonic jet, which we've just launched from Cape Canaveral. It's going to intercept our aeroplane at around about 25,000 feet over West Palm Beach, which is just south of the Cape, and he's going to film our aeroplane coming in. The Starfighter is the only aircraft that can keep up with us to film, and he's only going to be able to do that for a few minutes because of the speed. One more orbit, our Gulfstream G650ER is not going to slow down for anybody. Okay, so this guy is going to press him up. Okay, we're not slowing down.
Oh, there he is. Right below us. Wow. That's pretty awesome.
My turning 250 now.
Starfighter, is your right wing at this time.
There we go. Fantastic picture of the Starfighter on the right.
So pretty close to landing.
It's all good. Oh, it's beautiful.
There he goes. Yeah, there he sees you. He saw me.
See ya.